appreciate you, but with the shady business practices, it is a lot of like, okay, well, it's almost like you really gave us an inside view of things maybe we don't want to know about, but we can definitely benefit from, right? Like,
Yeah.
in order for someone to live in the upper, in the housing that's more expensive, someone's got to live in one that's not as expensive, so I
Hmm.
guess I wonder, I don't know if I'm unifying too much, but I wonder what you're kind of trying to say, maybe consciously or subconsciously, about like survival and the things that people do that are not always the most morally or ethically, correct, quote unquote.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, much of what you described about the job that Trelawney's doing in independent living, I mean, it's his job. If he's
Sure,
to do
sure.
the job and get paid and not get fired, and he not, I mean, he does things. He does do things that would also get him fired. That would be morally questionable. He takes
Hmm.
bribes.
Sure,
Like
sure.
he doesn't necessarily like respond to the bribes, but he takes cash.
Uh-huh.
He can't get caught sleeping in these dead people's apartments, or even
That
in
sounds
his
kind of,
car.
someone just checking in on this episode, like, you heard correctly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Can't get caught sleeping in dead people's apartments. Yep, yep.
But I guess I am interested in that, like where we draw the lines
Hmm.
for what's right and what's wrong, what we call right and what we call wrong. And
Yeah.
it's like if uh it's I mean, I found that it's a federally subsidized low income elderly housing
Mm.
apartment building, and so all of the practices, they're okayed, like not just by this nonprofit organization, it's
Sure.
okayed by the federal government, right? And
Yes.
so everything they're doing is legal. It's and so one might say, oh, okay, this is right, and it's like, oh, this is how
Mm.
we treat our elderly in this country. We have
Mm-hmm.
decided that this is okay to um they're dead today. We throw all their stuff out tomorrow. We get a next person.
Right.
We have a waiting list, and if you don't answer my first set of
Yeah.
calls, you get, we're gonna move on to the next one.
Yep.
You might scratch your name off the list. You're probably gonna die in wait trying to get into this place. We're gonna raise your rent at every opportunity.
Seriously.
We're gonna avoid you once you're in. We're gonna avoid you at all costs unless it's time to actually re-sign your lease, and then we're gonna dig into every detail of your life to try to understand like how much money we can milk from you. And
Pretty
but that
much.
is the job, and that's legal, and that's okayed, and that's government sanctioned. And Trelawney's trying to understand that, right? So a woman comes into the office, and she gives him the big bribe. She says,
Yeah.
I will pay you all of this money to get to the top of this list. And he's trying to understand, like, how do you survive in this world? Because at this point he's living out of his car. He's
Mm-hmm.
like, how do I be a good man and still survive in this world? And he wants to have her. She offers to cook dinner, but she's also suspicious of him, kind of like, what do you really want from me? And really what he wants is to understand, like, how do you survive? And how
Mm-hmm.
do you be good? And are those things mutually exclusive?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Oftentimes not throughout the collection.
Mm.
Um, I mean, definitely race and racism are definitely throughout the book. Just especially towards the beginning, like in that main story with like this, I guess the stratifications in race, even among the family, but like, how when he was, he wasn't found to be speaking Spanish, all of a sudden he was a Black American, he was
Mm.
outcast by one group, and
Mm-hmm.
just the idea of certain groups having things in common because of
Mm-hmm.
language, because of
Mm-hmm.
whatever. That last story, again, without giving away too much, that story on its own is just an incredible work of art. The ending of that story is one that I will remember for such a long time. You kind of alluded to it earlier, the idea of like an old someone looking back, and this idea of like almost like a prescriptive, here's what you should do, right? But you're gonna forget this, so here's what you really did do.
Right.
Right.
Mm.
But anyways, in that last story, I mean, basically, Trelawney picks up like a Craigslist ad, and
Mm-hmm.
this for this couple to be part of like their role playing, basically, right?
Right, exactly.
Like he's going to be like a voyeur, like on their sex life.
Right,
And,
right, right.
you know, some of the scenes, you do such a great job. We don't know for sure that they were set up by the couple, but probably were, maybe were. And I mean, to say that Trelawney was abused and discriminated against is putting it lightly. I mean, it was, you know, pretty disgusting behavior.
Right.
But he's also like, shoot, I really need the money,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
But even I think it was in the last story, right, where he's become a teacher by this point, and his principal is basically just openly, you know, saying racist things and racist procedures about the school.
Right.
In the end, and this goes, I mean, home, of course, you've talked about home is such a huge part of the book. In the end, the mom who had moved back to Jamaica, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
now it's not like she wants to go to Italy. She's got a job with the consulate. And
Mm-hmm.
she says, you know, basically Trelawney's like, hey, aren't you amongst your people? That kind of thing. She
Mm-hmm.
says, quote, sometimes you aren't one of your people anymore. I don't know if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Which was obviously such a deep line. The book has so much of the, I guess, implied racism and some that's so blatant. I wonder how much of the implied was meant to be implied. How much of it do you think kind of was a subconscious thing? How much did you go to the page saying, I want racism to be one of the themes?
Mm.
I don't need a percentage, you know. Well,
87.3%.
right. 0.362.
You know, it it'll sound weird to say, but like for most of the book, I wasn't thinking about racism. I was thinking about just like race.
Uh-huh.
And I guess I find like there's this hard for me to think about race without kind of criticizing it, critiquing it, I guess, more
Mm-hmm.
than criticizing it, but um trying to understand like how we categorize ourselves in the first place. Like it's hard for me to imagine race without racism.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like where these dividing lines come in, or without at least I don't know. I don't know if that's a fully formed thought. I think it's just like your description of the question was really well put in terms of trying to understand. The more I talk about it, the less I understand it, to be honest. Because it's like, is it he Jelani mixes with the Puerto Rican boys until they learn he doesn't speak Spanish because he's not Puerto Rican and he's Jamaican, and they kick him out of the group, but he looks like them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this funny thing where I imagine like Jamaica was actually first colonized by the Spanish, and I wonder if the
Mm.
Spanish were able to hold on to the island, and not be defeated by the English, then they would have been they would have been I guess he would have fit like history would have led him to speak in Spanish and
Mm-hmm.
fitting at this table,
Wow.
and but it's that simple thing of language, and also again like the boys prejudice against black people,
Mm-hmm.
and even as some of them themselves maybe grew up to be perceived as black people in America, at that moment they are drawing the boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
they're excluding along this particular line of an idea of blackness, that is not just about skin color or phenotypic traits,
Mm-hmm.
and then the Jamaican boys who are darker skinned than Trelawney, they also exclude him because he doesn't look like them,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe doesn't quite have that, hasn't quite retained his parents' language enough or the knowledge of Jamaica. They make him
Mm-hmm.
do funny tests to prove he's Jamaican, and you know, I don't think any answers will really suffice, because they're really just making him humiliate himself for their
Yeah.
entertainment. And so yeah, I mean, I'm just always curious about, you know, the way we like pretend like all of these answers are super simple when
Mm.
there are gray areas, and for some people they live in those gray areas, I think, and we rarely think about those people.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Appreciate that response. Obviously, family dynamics, father son, just the way that the brothers see each other and those behaviors manifest, expectations of manhood. The idea of basically they were split into the family of four was split into two and two early
Mhm.
on with the divorce, right, because of the cheating of Topper.
Mhm.
There's one paragraph I won't do justice to as much as you. It's on page 212, and again, one of the things about this book that's so great is just like so many like what could have been.
Mhm.
This is Trelawney, and this is Trelawney with his father, and he feels like he really has his father's attention because they're talking about money, they're talking about the house.
Right.
Quote, "You could say any number of things now that you have his attention. Have it because he wants something from you in return, perhaps for the first time in your life. You might demand that he tell you where he was, those nights you cradled your distraught mother in your 10-year-old arms, as Delano and you passed the phone back and forth, calling everyone in your mother's address book because you hadn't seen him in days. You might ask if it was laziness that made him choose Delano when your parents split, the mere fact of his being older meaning there would be less parenting left to do, or if he saw himself in Delano in his duplicated eyes. But answers in the mouth of the trustworthy are worthless. So you say, I need you to tell Delano he'll have to leave." Unquote. I have a really flimsy microphone, or else I would drop it. That line, answers in the mouths of the untrustworthy are worthless. I mean, that's some incredible writing there. And just again, the idea of like, this was his time. He could have said it, but he didn't. But he didn't.
Yeah.
But he didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think part of the project of it's not really the project of the book. It's just my, one of my obsessions is like, how do you ever get an answer to those things to the questions that you're obsessed with?
Mm.
And like, once somebody has let you down in really incredibly profound ways, like, can they ever come back from that? And I think that was something I was interested in exploring in the Trelawney and Topper dynamic, as well as
Hmm.
in the Cookie and Ox dynamic.
Okay.
And it's like, Cookie at the end of his story, um he wants to know what kind of man his father is, and I don't really think there's anything that Ox can say that will put Cookie's mind at ease.
Hmm.
But what Ox ultimately does is the truer answer. It's the truest answer
Yep.
that Cookie could
Yep.
ever
Yep.
get. And Cookie, in a sense, needed to know, and his needing to know and his getting the answer, he finally gets the answer, but it comes at the very high cost. And I think Trelawney in this moment is at the end of the book, or in this story that's at the end of the book,
Hmm.
is kind of articulating that, like what the hell could Topper possibly say at this point that is actually going to be believable? Because I just don't trust my father.
Who, or what is there a lot of survival? What are the people surviving? If I Survive You is the story itself
Mhm.
and the title of the collection.
Yeah. Who is
Who I
it?
mean,
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of the second person is operating as Trelawney, talking to himself, or Topper talking to himself and talking through the what has occurred in their lives and the decisions that they've made. Trelawney is often making terrible decisions,
hmm.
in my opinion. I mean, maybe not. Sometimes he's making hard decisions. Sometimes the
Sure.
options are all terrible. So it's like, choose that terrible one or this terrible one.
Yes.
But in some of the first person stories, I should also mention, there's this kind of direct address
Yep.
to the reader, like, well, what the hell would you do,
Hmm.
at one point he asks, he falls asleep dreaming of, he's been watching these documentaries on rhinos getting
Oh yeah.
poached, and he wants to defend them, but he also falls asleep imagining that and he's homeless essentially at this point. He's the working homeless, and or the working unhoused, and he is falling asleep imagining that he's at this fancy party at a mansion, and they've ground up the very last unicorn horn, and people are lining up to snort it because there's a promise of everlasting health and life. And despite his want to defend these rhinos, he's like, but would I do it? And he's like, would you do it? And he wants to know, like, what does it mean to be like good in this world? And like, how do we navigate that? And where's the line? And shouldn't you try to save yourself even at the cost of others? And he's constantly trying to make that decision. And sometimes he is deciding for himself. Sometimes he's deciding against himself. I think he could do worse things, and he would pull himself out of homelessness quicker.
Yeah.
So that it's a slippery U from the larger project of the book, the title. I mean, will Trelawney survive? Will these characters survive themselves in a sense when they're but will they survive this society that we all have created together in ways big and small? We're all contributing to the world that we live in. And the world that has been created, that Trelawney lives in, has not been created. He's not one of the main characters you see, right? You rarely see a main character like Trelawney in literature, for example, right? It's like, this world wasn't built for him, and so will he survive in it? And he has his own doubts. He realizes there's a line in that final story where he's talking about this idea of what he would tell to his children and his grandchildren. And then he kind of stops, and he's like, has this realization, like, but people like me, like, rarely actually survive to even have to live to see grandchildren. And he's aware of the fact that what he due in part to some of his choices, but due in part to some of his options, or all of his options, his bad options, he may not survive at all. And so that question of survival, it's there's surviving, when your parents die, and they're survived by you if you're still there.
Right.
What's going to be passed on from generation to generation? Will Jamaicanness in this family survive? For example, will that culture survive through the children? But there's also literal survival. Some of these characters don't survive the book. And I don't know, it's my worldview. I was invited to do some oral storytelling for a class I'm in, and I was just like, I was racking up all the friends I've had who have been murdered.
Oh God.
Family members, not my family members, but murdered by their own family members, or killed otherwise. And I don't know. Life is, if you get through, I'm grateful to be have made it to this age, and that's the world I've seen. So that's the landscape that these characters are kind of operating in.
Thanks so much for sharing that world. Thanks so much for putting us into it. It definitely goes up there with some of the best short story collections I've read, and I mean that. It's I think it had to be a short story collection. I think there's just so much uniqueness in each story, even though they are thematically linked. So please brag about yourself a little bit, like as in social media, where to find you, where to buy the book, if you have any special indie bookstores, that kind of thing. And again, I know you won't, because you're a writer and that's what you do, but you could definitely rest on your laurels after this. This is just a work of art that you've put out there. But I'd love to know maybe what else you might be working on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I am working on a novel, also coming out through MCD FSG.
All right.
Date to be determined. And you could find me. I keep my website pretty up to date.
Your website is dope. Your website is really, really good.
Thank you. Yeah,
I've seen some pedestrian ones. Yours is, it is.
Thank you. It's DIY only because I realize I'm actually like quite the control freak when it comes to my writing career.
Okay.
When it comes to like jobs and other things, I'm kind of like, I don't care. Like, put me on put me on a team assignment. I'll lead it or I'll just take a backseat. I just don't care. But when it comes to my writing life, I want my hands on every single thing.
Yeah.
And I just could not imagine giving my website, even like my website password, to anybody else, even if they're going to create the greatest design ever.
It's not Trelawney. Your password's not Trelawney.
Trelawney 123. But yeah, you can find me on Twitter as well, J_Escoffery. Do your best with the spelling. I'll pop up.
Right, I know.
And Instagram, it's Esco out. It's even harder. Esco out and play. But if you just type my full name, I'll pop up. Yeah.
Well, I'll share it on the episode links and everything like that. I know that you're going to be at City Lights tonight. This is going to be this episode will be airing after that. But is your book
Skylight Books in LA?
Oh, okay.
On October 14th.
Okay.
Just in case the episode airs before that.
Yeah. Well, I hope to go to one of your readings, being that you're Bay Area. And again, it was just so awesome to talk to you. Thanks for letting us into your head and talking about this great work of art. And it really is one. So, thanks again, and best of luck and everything else you do.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it was fun getting to talk. So thanks for having me.
Appreciate you. Thank you so much.